Ben Galbraith. I co-founded Ajax.com, and that was a few years ago now. We actually founded the site right about when Jesse James Garrett coined the term, like I think a month afterwards, just sort of on a lark, and it was a lot of fun. I was CEO of Ajaxian, and then we sold that in 2007 to another company, and we still maintain the editorial. And so then after that, I created a consulting company to focus on creating compelling user experiences in software, and that's what I do today. Originally, Ajax was about sort of taking advantage of capabilities in the browser that people didn't realize were there. Primarily to let you, from a web page, go to a server and get data, load that all within the same page and do something. And so that's really what started it. But the term has sort of grown in scope. I mean, originally the term was coined in order to sort of let people know that more is possible in a browser. And we've gone from just sort of remotely accessing data to doing some pretty amazing things with browsers today. One of the things I talked about today that really sort of excites me is this idea that web browsers can now finally let web pages do arbitrary graphical rendering. That is, in the past, browser developers, web developers have been constrained in the types of interfaces they could create because browsers were really just designed to do really basic things, forms and text, and we sort of hacked in additional elements, but it really hasn't been a comfortable situation. And now browsers are capable of doing all kinds of user interface technologies, and browsers are getting really, really fast. And so Ajax today is this combination of like JavaScript frameworks that make it much easier to do things in browsers, but also new capabilities that browsers have been gaining over the past few years. They're really exciting. Like 3 years ago, Flash was just simply a much richer environment than a browser. But the trade-off was that Flash was controlled by a company, and so it was viewed as a proprietary standard. And so that's sort of been a poison pill for a lot of developers that haven't wanted to entrust their future and their investment in the assets of one company. Today that's changing. The browser is now able to graphically do a lot of the things that Flash and Silverlight can do. The runtime environment in the browser, the sort of engine that drives the program, the so-called JavaScript interpreter, is actually getting much, much faster. So we're seeing that the browser itself, without going to these proprietary environments, can do some pretty amazing visualizations and do them really fast. And that sort of changes the game. There's one way in that both Silverlight and Flash trump the browser today in Ajax developments, and that's sort of developer productivity. It turns out that Flash and Silverlight are much easier to use than developing web applications in general. Part of the reason is that web application developers, when they stick to open standards, have to figure out the subset of those standards that Internet Explorer supports, that Safari supports, that Firefox supports. Whereas if you just target Flash or Silverlight, you just have one runtime and you don't have that cost. And then it turns out that because of the historical legacy of the open web standards, HTML and JavaScript and so forth, you've got to deal with the overhead of the fact that these technologies were not originally designed to power the types of applications that developers are building today, which further contributes to the sort of loss of productivity. And so, as the browser's capability have increased, that's the challenge that Ajax development has to face today is how can it become as productive as these sort of proprietary environments so that developers don't have to do what they do today, which is essentially trade productivity for openness. Ideally, we'd love to see a world where, some of us would love to see a world where Ajax developers can be productive in creating really, really rich and compelling software, and we're starting to see that happen. Additionally, web developers have focused on Internet Explorer and Firefox, and to a degree Safari. And some people have written off Safari, but as the Mac has gained share, pretty much most mainstream web development shops have had to support some mix of Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Safari. With Chrome in the mix, it really does make things interesting because what Chrome brings to the table is some great ideas on how a browser itself can be implemented, like their idea of one process per tab and things like that. It's really nice, a really fast JavaScript interpreter to sort of make new classes of applications possible. That's all great, but it is a new renderer. Now it's based on the same technology that Safari uses, but those two browsers will never be in perfect sync. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One reason is that Apple is intensely secretive, so they'll sort of hoard changes to their browser until they make them publicly released. And so Google and other people that use that same core technology, which is called WebKit, sort of have to develop in parallel. And so it is interesting. We're seeing this core engine sort of fork in all kinds of different ways because actually Adobe uses it for their product called Air. So for the web developer, hopefully, sort of the worst case is that you now have to focus on Chrome and that Chrome will have its own bugs. It remains to be seen just how idiosyncratic Chrome will be as compared to Safari. So I guess the simple answer to your question is Chrome sort of has free ideas in the form of open source code that other browsers can learn from, which is great and helps innovation. But it also potentially kills productivity because it's yet another browser developers may have to support. In my talk, I talked about the sort of browser innovation winter, where we didn't really see much innovation. That's largely because Internet Explorer won the browser war and then promptly shut down. And as developers, we've all suffered. And as their monopoly has shrunk, as Firefox has gained share and Safari has become less irrelevant,
can everyone hear me pretty well?
What we've seen is that Internet Explorer is starting to innovate, and
welcome
Google
to
here is
Security
helping with
Center
that.
Design.
And so we are starting to see that
Chris.
convergence happen over time. It's interesting in that there's actually two modes of Air. One mode is targeted towards Flash developers, and Flash is a whole other environment than Ajax. And so Flash developers can use their skills to create desktop applications or web applications projected through Flash. That's interesting. But Air has another mode targeted towards Ajax developers that lets Ajax developers, as you probably know, use their same skills to create an application that runs inside of Air on the desktop. And so you're right, Air in that sense is this sort of single-site browser technology. And that's exactly what Adobe is going for. I think if you talk to Adobe today, I don't know if they'd admit this publicly, but I think internally they probably are starting to feel more and more that the Flash runtime is less important to them than things like Air and other tools that they can market towards developers. Because I think over time you're going to see Flash become somewhat less important. Because right now, well, let's go back 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 years ago, the capabilities of Flash just creamed the browser. You could do so much with Flash. But the browsers started to catch up. And over time, the goal of the HTML5 effort and many of the browser vendors is to make Flash irrelevant. And Adobe sees that coming. So I think right now there is this tension of Flash versus the open web. But I really think the end game for Adobe, and I think they feel this way too, is that all their tools will just sort of work with Ajax developers, and they aren't really trying to compete against the web. They really just want to make money on their tools, and they don't really care whether their applications run in a browser or in their proprietary Flash environment. I think that's really where they're headed. The interesting footnote is that, you know, we don't need Flash as this sort of private application runtime that it's been used for up to now, because we can do so much in the browser. But where Flash is valuable, and maybe will always be valuable, is to sort of make new features possible. Like, right now there is no standard sound API in browsers. It's just not there. But there are JavaScript Ajax libraries you can use that use Flash under the covers. And because Flash is so widely distributed, you as an Ajax developer, you can actually realize you're using Flash. You're just writing JavaScript code and you say play sound, and under the covers it uses Flash. And I think we're going to see Flash maybe used more in this way, where as the browser implements features that Flash has today, Adobe goes off and implements a whole bunch of new features in Flash that browsers haven't even contemplated, and developers can use Flash for that up until the browsers gain those features. And Flash finds a comfortable niche as sort of a provider of these custom features ahead of the browsers. Maybe we'll see something like that happen, and that would be really interesting.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.